Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to have author Steven Fidler with us here today. Steven is talking to us all the way from Vermont in USA, and he's going to be speaking to us a little about his new book, The Two Paths, Finding the World Beyond Belief. Welcome, Steven. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Fiona. And hi, everyone. It's good to be here.
Stephen, tell me, what was the moment or realization in your life that made you feel this book, this particular book, needed to be written?
I'm a very reluctant author. I didn't want to write this book because when the idea hit me, it was like a thunderbolt. You know, when you have that flash and you're like, you have this deep sense of certainty that there's something there. But what really had me searching was, I don't know about any of you, but I had a lot of struggles. I had a lot of emotional struggles. I had a lot of psychological struggles. I even had physical struggles. And I wanted to figure that out. But what it showed me this through the struggles, I learned what didn't work. And then I was curious what would work. And that started me down this path because I had that inspiration that implied that I touched into something that did work.
You describe how our early experiences shape the way we see ourselves and the world. When did you first realize that your perspective wasn't necessarily reality itself?
Uh, well, okay, there's a story in the book. One, there's so many indicators along the way, and we just dismiss them because we're all taught from the moment that we're born that we're going to take what doesn't work and force it to work. And someday it will, and it never does. But we deny that because we override reality with what we're taught to believe. And when I was a little kid, great early story, well, actually too late for me. Um, I don't know if it was just me, but I believed in Santa Claus, but I was a true believer, like hardcore believer in Santa Claus. And there were indications along the way that said maybe Santa Claus isn't real. And it took an event where, okay, I was about 14. I was a hard believer in Santa. And my friend Nick and I, it was the last day of school before winter break to go home for Christmas. And we were at our lockers, and I just assumed still I that everyone believed in Santa Claus. So Nick was right next to me in the lockers and came to get his books to go home. And I was like, Nick, what did you ask Santa for Christmas? And he looked at me like I had two heads. And he looked around like, oh dear God, I hope no one knows you still believe in that. Because if the word got out, it'd be terrifying. It would be terrible for my like reputation and fodder for all the bullies. Um, and he was like, Santa's not real. He like leaned in, and I was like, shut up. And actually, he was pleading with me, and I punched him as hard as I could. And I glad I didn't know how to punch, but it really showed me that what I believed may not necessarily be reality.
Hmm. Hmm. And that brings me to your title, the title on the book. The title refers to the two paths. How
Mhm.
would you describe these two paths in simple human terms for someone encountering the idea for the first time?
And that's really the crux of it. That's what unveiled itself to me over a period of time. And that's why I wrote the book in the first place. We're all taught to try to force what we believe to become true. But there's a reality there behind all that we can just align with. And then things actually start to work. But we're all taught the wrong thing to try to solve. We're taught to focus on the problem. But if you focus on something, you feed it. And I'm talking about shifting the focus to a new perspective that allows for easier problem solution and over time, the ending of suffering.
Hmm. And what helped you begin questioning the beliefs you had carried for so long? Was there a particular turning point?
There were so many things that could have been turning points, but there were so many struggles. And it's the struggles that imply and sort of they're the indicators, emotional struggles or patterns that don't work for us. There are so many, but for me, it's usually not realized all at once. It's an aggregation of realizations over time. But what really changed it for me was when I lucked into taking hypnotherapy. And that showed me how the mind really works. And it's so much just steeped in belief and then tying emotions to those beliefs. But for me, um, after that fact, after I took this wonderful class and I started to practice and I started to see the patterns that everybody has the same exact problem, that we all have an individual perspective, but we're trying to make it reality for ourselves and everybody else, and it doesn't work and it can't work.
Mm.
So each person has their own individual lessons. And with the perspective of trying to either force yourself or other people to conform to that, it just creates more conflict and more problems.
Hmm. And many people sense something isn't quite right in their lives but don't know why. What do you think prevents people from seeing what's really happening within themselves?
Well, that's great. That's a great question. When we're kids, we're trained with punishments and rewards. And that is what we learn. That's the actual morality that we learn to live. If you conform, if you look the other way, if you benefit, then it's good at the expense of other people. Oftentimes, like we have this absolute entrainment into conforming to a dysfunctional, continuing paradigm that, and it becomes a belief. Most people don't examine their beliefs. They just habitually think, okay, I was taught this is how I get a reward. I was taught that if I don't do this, I get punished. And it becomes a real simple binary thing that goes on autopilot until you start to examine how they work. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Hmm. And was there a moment where you didn't just understand these ideas intellectually, but actually began to experience life differently?
Yes. Yeah. And that's the real gift. That's why I wrote the book. I didn't want to write it because it's such a, gosh, we're all taught like how can you solve your own pain and solve all the pain and the dysfunction in all the world? It's not the easiest thing to answer, but it happens over time. I, like a lot of people, I kept running into walls. I kept suffering pain. I kept having relationships that didn't work. I kept running into these same things, these same patterns and cycles over and over and over and over. And I finally said, well, okay, this is insane. That's the actual, Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. But we're taught that that's where we get our punishments and avoid our rewards. And literally, my blindness happened overnight to me because I had functional vision the night before and it was gone when I woke up. So there are these challenges that we think are just pain, but they're offering us something. They're telling us, how long is it going to be before we learn what doesn't work and look for what does? And no one teaches that. But there are so many potential turning points in our lives One for me was my brother. I was estranged from my brother. We hadn't spoken. We were on bad terms. It was always arguments. And after this was after the hypnotherapy course, he asked me if I could forgive him for all the childhood misunderstandings we had. And I couldn't. Here I had credited myself with all this learning and all these realizations. And then he asked me to do something that a good person would do, and I couldn't do it. And that showed me that it's really not believe. That I had plenty of justifications for keeping that struggle going with him and me. Um, but it showed me to look into the dynamics that he wanted somehow to get closer, and so did I. But the only way that we would stay in contact in my mind, since things were so bad between us, was to keep the conflict going so that he would come back in me. And when I saw that, that changed my relationship with my brother. I emailed him about it because we weren't in contact. We reconciled everything, and we're in great relationship today.
That's fantastic. Do you think that perhaps the blindness was in some way a gift and it allowed you to see things from a different perspective?
It really did. It was so hard. What I'm hoping to share with everybody is the lessons are really hard bought. Like they had a big price. And I would
Mm,
love for people to be able to learn and see these things faster so they don't have to suffer, because there's only two ways to get there. You're going to either suffer or you're going to learn. You're going to stay in a repetitive cycle of suffering and wish it were different, or you're going to learn how it works and be able to consciously change it. So the blindness gave me a really different perspective, in that everybody else has so much going on out in the world, and everyone's so distracted and engaged with all the things to see and places to go. Um, and when blindness took that away from me, it took away my sight, it took away all of my proactive go, 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 go. And then I had to look at what can I do? How can I engineer everything that I have to do? Because everything moved from an easy, I just want to do it, go do it, to how do I do anything? And that started to teach me how things actually work.
so it disengaged you somewhat and allowed you to engage differently with the world.
Inevitably, blindness is a disconnection. And
Mm,
anyone that struggles with it or suffers with it um, is feeling that disconnection. You know,
mm,
the whole idea of being alive is to connect with life more and more deeply, with friends, with family, with partners, uh, with our pursuits. We want to be able to just like a happy dog chasing a frisbee wholeheartedly. We just want to go after life like that. And
mm,
anything that gets in the way, emotionally, physically, it disconnects us from that sense of connecting with life.
mm, mm. And do you think that the world today is a good environment for people to start using some of the ideas that are in your book to live a better life?
Well, that's what's interesting about it is I started writing this book. This wasn't easy to find. It took me 9 years to finish this. We're over 9 years into this. And I need to share it because the world is in a perfect place for it. Um, there's so much struggle and upheaval personally in systems, and nothing's working that I can see hardly anywhere. So it's the perfect time for people to re-examine things, because you know it's waking people up to the fact that what we're doing isn't working.
So it must have been frustrating that it took so long for the book to finally come together. But in actual fact, there is perfect timing for everything. And it seems like this is the perfect
potentially.
time for it to be
Yeah.
released. Do you
Yeah.
think at any stage you might produce a workbook that might run with the book later that people can use, or
Yeah,
is
I'm
that
starting I'll start a YouTube
in the
channel.
plans?
But sorry, what? Go ahead.
Is that in the plans?
Oh yeah. Well, everything's in the plans. Now that it's done, I can start to share it and show people how to use it. Um, it's really there in the book, but um, a lot of times it helps people. I'm excited to help people, whoever is interested, to assimilate it and like incorporate it much more quickly than it took me. Because it's difficult when you're exploring an unknown trail. To cut the trail for the first time is really difficult, but it's easier once that trail is cut. So yeah,
Hmm.
I'm setting up a YouTube channel where I will offer videos and things to show the application through everything from movies and media and songs and political events and beliefs and relationships and dynamics, how it applies to all those things and how it can show a different way forward.
And where can this beautiful book be bought?
Oh, that's another thing. Everything is a learning curve for everyone, but blind learning curves are, you have to engineer everything. So I've completed the audiobook, I've completed the print book and the ebook, and they're all available at stevenfidler.net.
Okay, the two paths. At stephenfidler.net. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been wonderful sharing these few moments with you, and we hope to have you back here again.
Well, thank you, Fiona. Thank you, everybody.
You're very welcome.